Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Screen Society podcast, a podcast that covers all things TV, movies, and everything in between. I'm your host, Logan, and today we are jumping right back into the Pitt Season 2, Episode 6, titled 12 p.m., which aired on February 12th, 2026, over on HBO Max. This episode was directed by Noah Wiley, and the writers were Valerie Chu and Mel Herbert, and that writing room. And this was by far the best episode of the season. And that's saying a lot with this show because every episode ranks so highly on IMDb and everywhere that you can see the feedback. It is always very positive when you're talking about the Pit. So to have the best episode of the season happening just 6 episodes in to a season is quite remarkable. And I'm assuming there are going to be even better episodes, which is amazing to say. And I'm very confident that this show just keeps producing the same magic that it always does. I mean, we're tuning in for 15 episodes each season, and they are delivering hit after hit after hit. Season 1 was so very good, and season 2 is quickly following in its footsteps. So every time this show comes on Thursday, my wife and I are looking forward to watching it and really getting into the characters, because that's what ultimately is building this show so well. I mean, we're really getting into different characters this episode that we don't typically get a whole lot of coverage on. I mean, we get a lot of the physicians, a lot of the ER doctors, and a lot of shows focus, especially when they're medical dramas or they're medical shows. A lot of times they'll focus on the physicians, the surgeons, can't speak, but never really the nurse or the nurses. And I feel like Noah Wiley directing this episode had obviously a big footprint on why this show decided to really go into a nurse heavy episode. His mother was a nurse, and so he's got a deep appreciation for everything that they do and everything that they have to face, the challenges they have to face, the successes, the triumphs, whatever it might be in the nursing side of a hospital. And I think it's so very important that we highlight these folks because having worked in a hospital, or having working in a hospital as I currently do as a communication specialist, I've gotten to see recently just how much these people do for the hospital. And there's a lot of lines that drop in this episode, particularly that really show just how good nurses are for the healthcare system, and what they do is so underappreciated. They are so very intelligent, and I can't wait to break down some of these character arcs that we finally get some depth into the nursing staff in the Pit. So again, this episode is season 2, episode 6. It's titled 12 p.m. and it starts off after the cliffhanger in the last episode with our frequent flyer patient Louie, who is currently coding, and Dr. Robby and Langdon were in the room as he starts to code. Remember, Robby was bringing in a beer to celebrate with Louie because Louie was going to be discharged, and Dr. Robby is celebratory because he's making it through a shift just before he goes on his 3-month sabbatical, where he's going to take a motorcycle and head off to Canada to do some Doctors Without Borders, I think is what it's called, the program. But he's ultimately going up there for some work, but it's ultimately a break for him. And as he's going in to celebrate with Louie, Langdon is doing compressions on Louie because he is coding, and Robby is yelling for a crash cart. They bring in the crash cart, and like I predicted last episode, there is a lot of trouble ahead for Louie, as he does have some pulmonary issues. He starts to bleed from the inside out and out through the mouth, and it's quite a scene because of how much we've grown to love Louie. And it is so difficult to watch as they're trying to get the blood out of his lungs and try to get a pathway for him to breathe. And there's just an excess amount of blood coming out of his mouth. And it ultimately gets to a point where they're asking if, he can get, and there's things that they can do, I guess, with physicians and surgical, that they recommend getting what are known more of like artificial lungs. So if they can get him to a certain point, if he checks out, if he is able to fit certain criteria, they can get something to help him breathe. And if they can get him back, resuscitate him, and if he was able to check out, then maybe they could get him those. But it is said as they're trying to resuscitate Louis that he was not a fit for this particular procedure where he could get some help with his breathing and try to get that under control. So ultimately, what you get from this, and I've listened to some other podcasts, is some physicians try to explain it. So I'm doing my best trying to explain what's happening. But because the blood is coming out at such a quick pace, and because of his liver issues, his lung issues caused by his alcoholism, it's pretty much dire straits for Louis. And as the minutes go on, they do end up losing Louis, and our frequent flyer, somebody who has been through the first 5 seasons of this, or through the first 5 episodes of this season, he has been such an integral part of the Pit. I mean, he's become a mainstay character. He's been in every single episode. Dana comes in with Emma and is talking to Dr. Robby, saying, is he looking good? Like, are we getting him back? And Robby kind of gives Dana and Emma the shaking of the head, like, he's not going to make it. And Dana's explaining that what she has seen, she's not ever really seen anybody bounce back from this. And Dr. Robbie's like, we can keep doing compressions, but it's not going to do any good. Langdon's like, is there nothing we can do? Is there nothing we can provide for him to make sure that if we get him back, that we can keep him alive? And Dr. Robbie's pretty much like, this is it. And the team finally gives up. They pull out the tube, and they quit trying to resuscitate him. And at 12:07, one of our favorite characters in the whole show ends up dying, and we get quite an emotional reaction from the whole cast, as the fallout throughout the whole episode is from what they've experienced with Louis, but they're obviously doctors and professionals where they have to try to go and move on from something like this to happen at noon. You've got, I think at one point it says that they've got 9 more episodes. So you got about 9 more hours on a shift where you're trying to move past what's happened to you in this shift. Some of them have 6 hours left that have been dealing with Louis. But anyway, you're halfway through a shift, and now you've lost somebody that you cared about so much as a patient, as a person, and the fallout is very real. As the team starts to leave that room, you can just feel on everybody's mind. Perla, the nurse, was oftentimes the one caring for Louis. Dr. Langdon and Whitaker, which Whitaker's not even in the room when Louis decides, when Louis does code, and he's losing his life. Dr. Whitaker is nowhere to be found, and they try to page him, they try to get him in there, but he was dealing with another situation, so he was not able to jump in and help. But everybody's feeling this. I mean, frequent flyer Louis, everybody's pretty much had him in their care at some point. So I think that this is just an emotional toll that's going to set in for everybody. And I think it's going to be prevalent throughout the rest of the season. I think we're always going to get allusion to what happened with Louis earlier in the shift. So let's focus on what's going on in this episode. So again, like I said, there is a heavy shift towards focusing on the nursing team. And I don't know if anybody else really noticed it, but the camera, because I haven't really heard anybody mention it, but it did feel like the camera view was a little bit different depending on when it was covering nurses and when it was covering the physicians. Like, it definitely felt like a different kind of point of view at points, which I didn't know if that was intentional, because it was a episode focusing on another point of view that we've not really gotten yet. But it definitely felt that way early on, that it was like a lower camera view to the nursing staff. And I don't know if it was more on the grounds kind of camera view point of view, but maybe it wasn't intentional. Maybe it was just a directional thing that they were trying. But again, it could have been something meaningful. I would have to listen to more and more to try to figure out if Noah Wiley had that as something that they were trying to do and trying to convey through the way they were setting up the cameras. But that being said, it focuses so much on our nursing staff, and we're going to start by talking about just how good Dana is in this episode. I mean, Catherine Lanassa is arguably one of the best actresses slash actors in this show, and everybody's great. So that's why it's so um, fun to talk about, is the fact that she rises above in a way that, I'm not saying that the other ones are bad actors or bad actresses, but she is on a whole different level when it comes to and maybe it's kind of how the character is written. We get a lot more of just rawness and emotional grit and resilience from Dana. And maybe it's the motherly side of things and the nurturing side of things, but she is just a scene stealer when she is in a scene. I mean, she, no matter who she's in there with, even when she's in there with Noah, who is a very good actor himself, when she's in there with Supriya, who is very good as Moan, also with Taylor Dearden. I mean, they're all good, so you can put her up against pretty much anybody, and I would say that she is the most emotionally charged character that we have, and I think it also shows just how deep, and we get different things in this episode that we've not really discussed yet with Dana, and things that she's challenged with and struggles with. And so we get a whole different dynamic of what a nurse goes through throughout a shift. And I think we get an appreciation here. Um, she is, she embodies what it means to be from Pittsburgh too. I did listen to an interview with her where she has practiced the Pittsburgh accent. I'm not even gonna attempt to do it, but and I think a lot of people just assume in the United States that they've got the Southern accent, and then you've got the New Yorker accent and the Boston accent. But besides that, there's not really other accents, which is completely untrue. There are, I would say, even in states, there are different accents. And I know they're not as prolific or profound as some of the ones that you get from the UK, where they're very drastically different, or other countries where you can tell region just based off of accents. I think you could do the same thing with the United States. I do feel like there is this impression of the US where it's the Southern, the Northeastern, and then you've got like the Valley Girl. And I feel like that there's only three that people typically do when they're thinking about American accents, but there is definitely a Pittsburgh accent, and she pulls it off. And I don't even know how to really explain what it is. I think somebody compared it to almost like in the steelwork and the way that they do things. It feels very hearty, very almost Northeastern, but uh, more into the grassroots of the Northeastern accents. And that's a pretty good, I think, comparison of, or at least description of what that accent is. But she nails it, and in this episode, she is talking about how proud she is to be from Pittsburgh and from the Pennsylvania, from the Pencil from Pennsylvania, and sorry, my coffee's just kicking in. It's early in the morning, so bear with me on this episode. But ultimately, what I'm trying to say is Dana is what the pit really embodies. I mean, she is a go-getter. She's resilient. When she gets her ass knocked down onto the floor, she gets right back up and she's ready to throw a punch back. And we actually do get a lot of things going on with Dana that we're not quite thinking through, I think, when you're focusing on the physicians, because the show has been very physician heavy so far. I think it's pretty cool to get a different perspective. So Dana, again, throughout this episode is dealing with multiple relationships, and we're going to start with hers and Dr. Langdon's. So there is a really great moment. Uh, it's about midway through the episode when Langdon and Dana are having a conversation, and this is about 20 minutes into the episode. I got my episode pulled up over here as I normally do, just to kind of go through the scene through with you all and react to it. So she goes into a break room, and Dr. Langdon is sitting there like right around lunchtime. So a lot of them are dipping in and out to grab their lunches around 11 and 12 and 1, or when a lot of the clinical team will start to eat and try to shift on other people who are going into more of that mid afternoon shift. But Langdon is sitting at the table in the break room, and he's holding a picture of Louie and this mysterious girl that Louis had never really mentioned to anybody, so we think. But later on in the episode, we'll get to what that picture is. And in this picture, again, it's Louie and this woman, and he seems to be very friendly with her. He's it's a nice little it's a couple portrait. So he's like sitting, I think they're sitting on stairs and she's sitting in front and he's got his arm around her. So I think that the insinuation is that they're either romantically involved or this is some kind of family member. And Dana comes in and she goes, I should have known that I'd find you in here. And Langdon's like, what do you mean? And she goes, you steal anybody's lunch, you got to pay 20 bucks. And so she's kind of going through, there's new rules on the fridge. And she's going through these new rules because Langdon's been out for 10 months on his rehab. And she said there's been a lot of changes that have been made. The reason why all this is brought up is she's trying to tell Langdon, and this is telling the audiences that there has been so many changes, which there always are. I mean, if you left the healthcare system for 10 months or you left a job for 10 months, so much is going to change. People are going to change. The actual staff itself will change. The team, they're going to get new people in, old people out, new systems in, especially because I mean, I'm sitting there every week and there are constant changes to the programs and the systems that the clinical teams are using. So physicians have a ton of changes on the back end of things where they're having to learn new programs, new updates to new systems. And when I tell you that healthcare, they have thousands of different things that they're looking at. I mean, I'm not even kidding. There are so many systems that they're having to check, whether it's and they try to streamline it through system. Like for instance, in our hospitals, they call, or in a lot of hospitals, there is a system called Epic, which is a lot of times you're having medical records on there. You're having physicians making notes there. They're pushing different updates through there. They're informing and it's a way to communicate internally with a lot of medical records. So the epic system is what houses all those medical records, and then everybody has access to the system. But then you have other things like the internal systems that people are using, and quality has systems that they use, and comms has systems that they use marketing, admin, you've got supply chain, you've got finance. They all use different systems. So when Langdon comes back, this is a good way, I think, for them to be very subtle with the fact that, like, you've been gone for 10 months. This is just the lunch system changing. Like, you steal people's lunch from the fridge, you're going to pay 20 bucks. And there's 10 rules that are on this list. That's just lunch. Like, this is nothing to do with the healthcare system. This is just the lunch and the break room rules that have changed. Now think about what's happening on the floor and then the hospital, of how many things have changed and how in depth things have changed from the time that Langdon has had his suspension and then he goes into rehab, and now it's been 10 months. So a lot of time has passed, but Dana is grabbing a drink and she said that she'll let him hang out in here and hide a little longer. And it's funny because earlier in this episode, you get administration sends down donuts on the 4th of July. And then you'll see this a lot on holiday weekends, or team member appreciation or nurses week. A lot of times what admin will do is to celebrate team members, it's often involves food, which I think that's pretty common amongst any workplace. Is employees are celebrated with food because it's a good way to say thank you. Everybody loves food. For the most part, the things that they provide are things that people do want, but there is a lot of obvious kind of corporate clashing where when the joke became if there's a problem in the department, or if there's an appreciation that you just ordered the team pizza and that solved everything. And throughout 2020 it became a huge meme of, we know you're going through a lot, here's some pizza to try to help you through COVID. And it became a meme where, like, corporate, the only way they show that they can care is by throwing people a pizza party, which is totally not true. It kind of feels like a backhanded slap to the head of, like, we think so little of you that we think that we can get you through the biggest, most challenging time that you probably have ever faced in your life by just giving you pizza. And if your pizza's good, then you're good and everything's good, which is far from the truth. We were going through so much during COVID, but that seemed to be, even before COVID, that seemed to be the thing where companies, to fix culture or to build relationships or to build engagement, oftentimes meant just giving people food. Like, here's some food, and I hope that changes everything. I hope that fixes all the problems, and I hope that means that you're going to stay with us forever, which it does. It does feel very disingenuine, but there are times where I think it is appreciated. And I know, for instance, in our hospital, there is a lot of focus around food, but there is also a lot of focus on just giving the team members a break and allowing them to engage in a way that is genuine. And they're very busy, and I know that there is always going to be that group of people or those groups of people that when that feel underappreciated, and nothing is ever going to make them feel appreciated in a workplace. But I do think that with the food, you also have to make an intentional effort to engage, to show appreciation, to have C-suite show up and interact and thank them personally and look them in the eye as they're giving them their donuts or whatever it might be. And in this case, in this episode in the pit, administration sends down a cart and administration is giving out donuts to everybody on the staff. And, they're good looking donuts. They're great donuts. And, it is a lot of money to buy these donuts. And it does feel like an appreciation because of how much admin is spending. But there's then the comments from, which is very normal in any corporate setting, when corporate places do go out, and I'm not saying this is the correct thing to do, but corporate places go out and spend a ton of money on food or a meal or meals to try to show their appreciation, or they'll spend money on DJs or whatever it might be, or a party. So these corporations are spending a lot of money, and in their eyes, that's a lot of money to spend. Whereas then on the flip side of that, the team that you're trying to appreciate sees how much money this could be and just says, I would just like the money in my paycheck. So there is this really interesting dynamic between corporate and the team members and that are serving at the hand of some of these corporations. So it's a very interesting dynamic. And obviously, yes, like, could administration just give out that money? Yeah, like, I think everybody could. But there is this idea that even if you did that, it's like, oh, so you just think money's gonna fit. So it is. It's a very back and forth kind of relationship. I don't get it too much into the corporate politics of things, but that's what's happening in the pit. Is they send down donuts, and Dana is pissed because she goes, "What you think about?" She calls them administration blood donuts, admin blood donuts, which is such a great line of like, you really think that this is gonna solve the issues? Like, just 10 months ago, we had a shooting, and we're trying to get through the trauma of dealing with a shooting that had happened, and we had to help all these patients, and a lot of them died or were injured and life altering. And she goes, "You think of just donuts were going to fix that? The issues that we have down here?" No, it's not. But she calls them blood donuts. It's really funny because Donnie, one of the nurses under her, comes around the corner and he's got the donut, and she's just like, "Donnie, you traitor, why are you grabbing the admin blood donuts?" And then as Noah's going towards the donuts too, because he's like, "Oh, look, your friends from admin sent us donuts down." And so he's going to get the donuts, and he's like, "Aren't you going to get them?" And she goes, "Yes, I don't want to, but of course I'm going to get it. But like, I still think it's a way they're just trying to like buy us out with just donuts." And it is a really funny line. But in the break room, she sees a sign in behind Langdon. That was very long winded to get back to where we were in kind of the recap. But Dana sees a sign behind Langdon's head on the bulletin board, and it's like, "We appreciate you," kind of thing. Pittsburgh Trauma Center. Here's some donuts on the 4th of July. Later on, they're actually going to have, it says, "Thanks for showing your support, PTMC." It's like, and this is like Team Pride. It's got a donut that's decked out in USA because it's the 4th of July. And later they're going to have like a hot dog truck there, and they make a comment about it too. But it's always become quite a thing to kind of go after admin for the stuff that they try to show appreciation through. But back to what Langdon is discussing, he is talking about how it's not been going very well. He tells Dana this is not going well. And this is the first interaction they really had where they've been able to talk about personal things. And Langdon tells her that he's got a patient that's died on him, one septic bounce back, so meaning the patient left where he thought they could get her discharged, and she came back. Now she's got to get her leg amputated, so that's a disaster and almost kills her. She goes, "What are you?" Dana goes, "You expecting a party, Langdon? Like, what did you want people to be celebratory? Like, we've got a job to do. Sorry that didn't happen." She goes, "Sorry this stuff has happened to you." And Langdon then flips it around on her and says, "How you doing?" And remember, Dana had been punched last season, assaulted by one of the patients. And she said, I decided not to press charges. And it was interesting. I listened to the HBO Max companion podcast that they do with the Pitt, and they were interviewing, they were interviewing, sorry, I blanked and then I tried to swipe over, and they interviewed Catherine, who plays Dana. And she said that she was never told, kind of what filled that gap between what happened with her when she got punched. So she kind of made up her own story to what happens to her in this season. And she said that she pictured Dana taking some self defense classes. And she said the way that she felt like Dana would react would be very white knuckle, kind of just get through it because she's tough, she's resilient, she's a what do they call them, Pittsburghians. I don't know what they call people from Pittsburgh, but because she is the heart and the soul and the toughness, that she needed to just get through it. She didn't press charges. She tried to take a break, but came back, or she flirted with retirement, but came back a couple weeks later. And now we're 10 months into the future, and now she's back. So, and seems to be normal, but we get a lot of things from this episode where we understand that she's still dealing with a lot. But she's talking to Langdon about this, and Langdon then gets up and he goes over to her and he says, and he's going through the 12 steps. So he's asking for forgiveness from his colleagues. And as he's trying to explain himself, she says, "You do not need to explain yourself to me. You can check me off your list," because that's ultimately what Langdon is doing throughout this season. Is he's going from colleague to colleague, apologizing, and then if they do accept, then he can move on and try to get apologies from others. But as he's explaining this, Dana stops him and is like, "No, we got far more important things." And this was great because it does show that obviously Dana, and she has told us that she is a mother, and Catherine, who plays her, is a mother, and she said that Langdon reminds her of her own kid, and that she felt the best way to play Dana in this situation was to very motherly of a kid, because people screw up, and in life a lot of people, especially something like this that Langdon has done, deserve the second chance, right? It's not like he's a repeat offender, and there are a lot of people that have even more grace than that, where even repeat offenders, time and time again, they're willing to accept another chance and another chance for people, which, they're different people, are, feel different ways about that, where they'll just keep giving people chances. And Langdon finds out that Dana is very willing to give him a second chance, and that then Dana makes the comment of like, "You need to get out of your own head, because we need you, and we need the Langdon back that we had, because shit's hitting the fan here at the Pit, especially with Westbridge being down. We need you in this moment. So time to stop kicking yourself and get your head out of your ass, so that way we can." So it's very Dana's tough love. It's a great scene. I thought it was brilliantly played by Catherine and Patrick, and I really just appreciate everything that Catherine offers as a character when she's acting. But she then has very interesting interactions with Noah in this episode, because she is trying to move on from something. You can tell that she's battling things, and she makes some comments to Noah, like, that Noah's only, or sorry, not Noah, that Dr. Robbie's only going to be taking a month instead of the 3 months that he has planned. She goes, and that Langdon, when they're leaving the break room, ask if she thinks, or if he thinks that, or sorry, if she thinks that Robbie would talk to him. And she says, "No, I don't think he really wants to talk right now, especially because he's going on his vacation after this shift. So he doesn't really have the time." And she basically tells Langdon to kind of leave it alone and do it when he comes back. And you can tell that Langdon, he really needs this. Like, that's the one that he really wants, that acceptance of his apology from Robbie. But Robbie's not really willing to give him the time of day at all to even talk to him. So that's what Langdon is struggling with, because he's his mentor. And I think Dr. Langdon feels like he's really disappointed in the one person that cared about him the most. And Ian Langdon even says it, that even his wife, who had all the reasons to leave him during this 10-month rehab, said that she even she backed him, but it even felt stronger. Like she really supported him and really wanted him to get through this, and that she didn't take his daughter and leave, that she tried to work with him through this. So it just shows that Langdon is waiting for one more uh, acceptance from the people that he felt he disappointed the most. And Dana points out the fact that, and she kind of says it to Robby too, is like, you need to stop running from what is happening with you, accept it and move on, and talk about things, and try to work with other people to get through some of these things that you're struggling with. And so Dana has a couple of interactions with Robby in this episode again about his sabbatical, and it's more of just the fact that like everybody's got their thing and everybody's working through something, but running from the problem isn't going to solve anything. So that's pretty much all that happens between Dana and Robby during this episode, and Dana and Langdon. We also have uh, Emma, who is the new nurse that has stepped in, and Dana takes her under her wing. She's a young kid just out of college of nursing school, and Dana takes her under her wing and is trying to show her the ropes. And you get a lot of Dana and Emma in this episode because you really needed it for the setup at the end. So I feel like that's where they really leaned into how she is with Emma. And so throughout the episode, obviously they're dealing with Louie's death, and Emma is learning how to do things that you don't necessarily think about on the clinical side. Dana goes in and has a moment where she is saying her piece and having her piece with uh, Louie's dead body. Pretty much, she is going in to try to have that moment, and I think she starts to pray, and then Emma walks in because Dana's like, "Have you ever cleaned a dead body?" Because we're going to do that to give Perla, who had been taking care of Louie, the nurse that had been taking care of Louie. Dana's like, "I don't want you to have to deal with this. This is, this is going to just tear you apart. So we'll do it." So Dana is going to teach Emma how to clean a dead body. And you don't really think about this, where oftentimes a clinical team will have to, at least on the surface, clean the dead body very well so that they can then either transport the dead body, somebody can come in and identify the dead body, or they're getting ready to move it on to someone that's going to cremate or even embalm, whatever it might be, where they're going to have to prepare the dead body for a funeral. But before that, I mean, Louis had blood all over him, and they're not just going to transfer him with blood all over, because obviously that can be very hazardous for not just the team, but for everybody involved handling Louis's body. So Emma is cleaning with Dana, and she's asked if she's ever cleaned a dead body before, and Emma's like, "No, like this is not something that I ever thought I'd really had to do." And she didn't goes, "I guess I didn't really think of this." And she's talking to Dana, and um, one of the most interesting aspects I think I've ever heard of when you're thinking about this process, which also is not really a process that even I thought about, like, oh man, somebody really would have to clean that dead body, and it would often be the nurses. So Dana says a really interesting though thing to Emma. She says, make sure that when you're cleaning the dead body, obviously you want to get all the blood out from different places where it's not visible on the surface. Obviously around the neck and mouth area where they're cleaning, around the chest area, and then on the arms and hands. And she says, we tuck everything under the cover except we leave one hand exposed outside of the blanket. And Emma's like, okay, that's weird, but why? And this one was like, damn. Dana goes, it's so that when somebody does come in, if they want to hold their loved one's hand as they're saying goodbye, that they can. So that's why we leave one hand out. And that was rough. I was like, man, that's something you don't ever really think about, but something that is so genuine and caring and loving. And Dana does this out of love and out of respect for not only Louie, but for whoever is going to have to come in to say goodbye to Louie or identify Louie. Just really tough. And Dana, again, treating this much more of like this is family rather than just another case of somebody that has passed. And I know that this isn't maybe necessarily the norm every single time, but I do think that there are a lot of moments in healthcare where these clinical teams get close to their patients because they've, some of these patients are either frequent flyers, they come in quite a bit, or they've been in the hospital for a couple of days or weeks, and these teams do tend to, and I think this is another thing that you really got to think about, is that mentally a lot of times the clinical teams will maybe keep patients at arm's length. So maybe they're not giving the most warmth of care. And I think sometimes that's to protect themselves, which I totally get. And I think that is something that we take for granted, is that these nurses and these clinical teams are able to interact with these patients to show that they care, but try to keep them at arm's length. Because I mean, can you imagine like working with like the people you are working with, if there was a lot of death and you're having to say goodbye to these people, and it's pretty normal that you're having to say goodbye to some of these patients, it would take an emotional toll on you if you were, you know, not all the time, but pretty frequently having to say goodbye and trying to understand death. Like that's such a hard thing to do, I think, for most normal people. And these people are faced with it quite often in their day-to-day lives, in their work. So I can only imagine what it is like to go to work, because there's hardly any profession like this where you go to work knowing that you could be seeing someone die today. That's just a wild thought, and something I think is portrayed so well in this episode, of that really the clinical teams, especially the nursing team, is the heartbeat of the hospital. They are a majority of the hospital. They make up like 80 or 90% most of the time of these hospitals, or even maybe sometimes less, but I mean it's a majority nursing, and they run these places. And the physician, there's a really good point where at one point Whitaker says that says this to Ogilvy and Joy Kwan, that uh, we we know the nurses run the ER and we just try to stay out of their way. And you can see that with the nursing team and the way that Dana runs the floor and is communicating with her team, is that their job is so vital to what happens in a hospital. And that's something she's trying to convey to young Emma. And she goes, "Are you sure you want to get into this profession? Like some crazy shit that you have to do if you get into this profession." And Emma, very nervous, obviously, because she is new to the profession and in real life situations for the first time since she's decided she wants to become a nurse, and has done all the studying, but has never been faced with, it's a very interesting dynamic, because a lot of the med students and a lot of the nurses that we're seeing right now come into the field were in nursing school, or really getting their baseline during a time where they were practicing on fruits and vegetables at home because COVID had shut down their schools, and having to do things virtually. I was actually just talking to one of the nursing leaders at our hospital, and she said that it's so interesting because you're now seeing the generation that had to do all of this stuff at a time where they weren't allowed to practice in labs, and like they did not have real life experiences because of COVID. So you're seeing a pretty big gap. And she said that she's starting to see kind of the end of it, where you're starting to see in 2022 where schools really started to open that back up. But I do think that there are some areas too where they thought it was very convenient to be able to do these virtually, and so they've kind of switched to that option. And now you are seeing a big difference in the way that nursing students come through the system, and med students. So very fascinating, and a interesting way I think that the Pit is conveying that as well. And maybe they're not doing it as intentionally, but I do feel like Emma is one of those products of that time period where she had a lot of things that are supposed to be so foundational and very basic to do, she's having to relearn these things because she was taught one way and maybe not the most effective way because they were at home doing it virtually online through Zoom and stuff. So very, very fascinating. And you get a lot of great moments with Dana and Emma in this episode of her just trying to explain the goings on that happen in an ER and in a hospital and how they can try to help situations. But ultimately it's Dana's pit and everybody else just kind of works in it. So I think as far as Dana is concerned, we get some other moments where she's talking to Emma and when they're doing the whole thing with the hand when they've removed Louis from the actual pit and taken him into a room where the family can come in and identify him and the social workers are trying to contact family and Emma's like, well, what's going to happen if nobody comes in to identify, and that's when Dana makes the point of like everybody's got family, it's just a matter of if they want to come in and see them, which is mostly true, but I thought it was an interesting comment because I'm like, well, it's not necessarily true. Like there are some people that are, and I think it does show at the end of the episode. I do think that all of Louis' family is not going to come in to identify him. So sometimes the only people that will be around at that point are people that took care of him and during the hospital. And Dana is talking to him and saying that where, everybody's kind of got family. And I think something that shows this, there's another point in the episode where Dr. Langdon, and this is when Whitaker sees Dr. Langdon and Louis for the first time, where Langdon's like, dude, we tried to call you, but Louis died. Um, Before we get there though, what an ass Ogilvy is. So Whitaker finds out that Louis dies because Whitaker goes up to Perla and says, I need to go check on Louis. And Perla is getting ready to break the news that Louis died. But Ogilvy overhears it and Ogilvy goes, nah, dude croaked. And Whitaker is so close to Louis. Like Whitaker's like, what the hell? And so he's clearly thrown and then really sad. So he goes and takes off towards Louis's room. And Ogilvy kind of walks away and Perla, which I'm not sure. I don't know if they're speaking Spanish. I got to look up what language they're speaking. But she says in her language, she goes, I think she says like fucking new guy. Like, what an asshole. Like, you're such a dick. The way that she looks is just very annoyed that this new guy just had no empathy. And that's something that I know a lot of physicians come out of med school because they've been behind the books where empathy might be a little lacking at some point. And bedside manner is something that you kind of get better with as you get further. And there's a lot of physicians that are good at bedside manner, but there are more so than not, a lot of the physicians do tend to struggle with bedside manner at first, and they see things very black and white. And they're so used to diagnosing things and the problem, they do have a hard time kind of pulling it back and saying, "Oh, these are people that we're talking about." So I think you get that dynamic there. And it was just very subtle, but very interesting. So Whitaker goes and runs to Langdon. Langdon tells him that Louis died. He tried to get him down there when he was coding, but nobody could get a hold of Whitaker. Whitaker is obviously very upset. And Langdon's like, is there an emergency contact that we can, call to identify Louis? And they said, yeah, there's a phone number there. And I'm like, damn, this is going to get real interesting. Like, we're getting ready to get one of Louis's family members in here and really hear some deep stuff. But they call the number. Langdon's like, do you want to call? And Whitaker's like, no, I don't think I can do it. And Langdon's like, it's fine. I'll call him since you were the primary care. I just wanted to ask you before I called. So Langdon calls, and then you get it panned over to the nurse's station, and Dana picks up the phone at the nurse's station. She's like, yeah, this is Pittsburgh Traumas. Dana, what's up? And it's Langdon. She goes, Langdon? And they're looking at each other from across the hallway where he's standing in the doorway. Like, the hell? Like, why is the emergency contact from under Louis to the hospital? And she goes, it makes sense that we would be his emergency contact, which is so sad because, I mean, you would put anybody, you would put friends and then family and then distant relatives. Like, you would put anybody you could possibly put on there as emergency contact if you didn't have remaining family that really cared. But this kind of shows, I think, that Louis wasn't close with anybody, and he probably had exiled himself from family members that would have cared to have come in to identify the dead body. And so sad. and I'm sure is pretty this happens pretty frequently, more so than we probably care to want to say it would. But there are probably a lot of people that are very lonely in this world, unfortunately, that don't feel like they would have somebody that would care enough to come in should they have a medical emergency or should die. And as they're talking about this, this is when you really start to see that there's something deeper going on with Dana, because Emma goes, "Why? So why do you keep doing this stuff? Like, all these things happen, all these bad things happen to you, and you keep coming back." And Dana doesn't say anything, and then she says, basically, "When you're done with cleaning up Louie, go try to find something, or go catch up with someone else to see what they're doing." Basically pushing everything away and, like, keeping Emma at far length from what she's actually feeling. So that's the first time I ever saw, since she's had the issue with getting assaulted last year and COVID, that she really is struggling. And she even made a, comment, very subtle comment about COVID and how even during COVID, they didn't have time to clean up the dead bodies, and it's in that same scene where she didn't have time to do that, that they just kind of moved that body out and never saw the body again because they were drowning in what was going on because of all of the death around them and the patients in and out of the ER, which was just another wild thing. And you're clearly seeing that she's struggling with the trauma of COVID. She's struggling with just the trauma of being a nurse for I think over 30 years now. She's coping with this idea of, you know, not being okay. And she's running from it. Like, she seems to be running from her problems. So very parallel to what one of her good friends is like in Dr. Robbie. Like, it feels very similar that both of them are the heartbeat of the pit, that so many people look to them to be a strong force. So they don't want any kind of weakness to show. And that can be good at times, but everybody needs their moments of vulnerability, but neither of them are willing to offer that to anyone. It's funny because Dr. Robbie and Dana, at many and multiple places, especially in this episode and especially the last 5 episodes for Dr. Robbie, Dana and Robbie have said to people, like, "If you need to talk, I'm here for you." Robbie does it in this episode. He talks to Whitaker like, "Hey, I heard you're really struggling with Louie's death," and he gives him kind of these fist bumps, which is really awkward, and I think it's meant to be awkward. He gives him like a double fist bump. "If you need to talk to me, son," kind of thing. And Whitaker does double fist bumping, but he's kind of like, the hell was that? Like, it was a very weird, like, it was arm's length, right? I think Robbie is okay to hear some of this stuff, but he does keep people at a distance so he doesn't have to allow himself to be vulnerable and go through his own problems. And it's the same thing with Dana, same thing with Emma. She does it with Perla. She does it with Jesse at one point, because when they're taking care of the prisoner that has come in, Dana does that. Talking about the prisoner, Dana goes in, and our patient that is a prisoner that's in the orange jumpsuit that is still with the security guard or whatever he is, the cop that has brought him in to get care. Our prisoner seems to be malnourished. He seems to be somewhat abused in a way, and there is concerns that he is not getting fed the things that he needs to be fed. So they are, and our prison system has always been a shit show. But um, you know, no matter what, people I don't think really deserve to be treated like animals. I mean, there's a lot of people that are in prison systems that either they were wrongly convicted or, like, they deserve second chances. A lot of them do. And I think there's a lot of that feeling in this show. And Dana goes in to see this patient, and that patient is talking to, at this point, she's talking to Mel. And I think Jesse's the nurse that's in there with the the patient, and they're talking about, what can we do to help? Are you getting the things that you need? And he's basically saying no. They asked about fruits and vegetables. He goes no. They're like, okay, well, because your jaw's, it needs to heal. It's broken, but it will heal on its own. But you need to do a liquid diet. Do you have a blender? And he goes, do you really think I have a blender? And he holds up his wrist because he's handcuffed. And they go, oh, sorry. It just shows how much again, another fascinating moment of just telling us what society's really like our prisoners who get admitted into hospitals or taken to other hospitals to get emergency care that they can't provide at the prison facilities. Uh, these people are professionals in the hospital who treat every patient as if they're their own, and they don't really care who you are. They're going to treat you with kindness and respect as it should, without any kind of judgment. And it does such a nice job in the show of doing just that. These doctors and these nurses don't give a crap that he's wearing a jumpsuit, and they're just trying to solve what's going on. And they're like, "You're malnourished. Like, you don't get enough vitamins. You don't get enough of the stuff that you need to keep your body healthy." And he's like, "Yeah, I mean, you're pretty much on a starch diet. Like, you're eating pasta and like potatoes, and that's basically all they're feeding." Because prisons are trying to feed them the cheapest amount of resources that they have, because they're trying to, save money, but they're also, these are prisoners, so they kind of look down on these people, I think the prison system does. And not necessarily fair to a lot of people. And so that is a clear statement being made here in the pit, which I really love. And they're talking about it, and they're like, "We can get you a drink that has the vitamins and stuff that you need inside of it. So we'll go get that for you. It comes in like more of like a milkshake form." And he's like, "Yeah, I'll take chocolate. That's great." And he kind of gives like a little bit of a smile. And this guy has not tried to get out of his handcuffs. Every time they've tried to move it, they almost set it up where it's suspenseful, where he could try to like get out of a handcuff and try to hurt somebody, but he never does. And he's very kind. And Dana has a great moment where I think it's him that says it, or they realize that the accent, they're both from Pittsburgh. And she goes, "Oh, where'd you grow up?" And he tells her and they grew up in the same town and in Pittsburgh. And um the same part of the neighborhood of Pittsburgh. And they're talking about a tavern, and he's like, "Yeah, I used to work there in high school." And she goes, "Wow." And I think they're roughly around the same age, so they probably had interactions with each other. And she goes, "Wow, I had my first kiss there." And so she kind of like smiles, and they have this real genuine moment of connection. And when Jesse leaves the room, he's in one of these rooms, and Dana does something. I'm obviously not a medical professional, so I don't know how she's pulled this off, but the pulse ox level has to go to a certain point. I think it's like right around 90 or something. Is you're okay to be discharged. She gets it somehow below. I don't know if she tampers with the machine, or like the oxygen level in the rooms you can change. I don't know how she does it. She does throw tape at Robbie, so I don't know if there's a way that she could do something to his nose, or something. Something happens to where she's able to lower the pulse oxygen levels enough to where it looks like he's not able to be discharged, because they have to keep him in there if he's having breathing issues. So it drops below. I think that baseline is 9. Like, you have to be above 90, and he's below it. And Robbie's like, "What did you do? Like, weren't you in the room when his blood or his pulse ox level dropped?" And she's like, "Yeah, I was in there. I don't know what happened." She's clearly done something to where she's dropped it a little bit, or at least given the impression it has dropped a little bit. Kind of tricked the system, so that, because then they have to admit him to the hospital. And because the whole discussion had been about, like, Dana has had the discussion with Al-Hashimi and Robbie, where Robbie's like, "Get him out of there. Like, get him out of the, like, he's 2 hours in. Once he hits the 2-hour window, we need to just discharge." So anybody that hits a 2-hour window that is able to be discharged needs to be discharged, so that they can make more room. And then Robbie's like, "Gotta get him out of here." And Al-Hashimi, which is shocking, was like, "No, we're trying, like, no, he needs to stay for more observation. Like, we cannot let him go." So even Al-Hashimi is feeling bad, which is very odd, because she's the rule follower. She would almost seem like the person that said, like, "Let's get him out of here like at an hour and 50, if we can." But Al-Hashimi puts her foot down, like, "No, Robbie, like, that's not right. We can't just throw him out because he's a prisoner." And because he's kind of weighing his options, he's like, "All right, where can we start to discharge?" And he goes, "Well, the prisoner, let's start there, because obviously he's the one that probably doesn't need, or at least deserve, the amount of care that we're going to give him." Which is the first time I've ever seen Robbie kind of be an ass about things. And he's basically like, "Let's get that dude out." And Dana and Al Hashimi put up a good fight, and we're like, "No, like, that's not happening." Because we treat everybody like they're supposed to be treated. And Robbie's like, "I'll call the prison to see if they have the resources to take care of him and get him back on the track." And Al Hashimi are like, "No, like, we want to try to get him back on track here." Again, a brilliant moment of speaking to how things are in the real world and in everyday life and the ER or in the hospital of dealing with something like this. So again, Dana, such a very strong episode, and I think probably the star, I guess the employee of the episode is what we'll call him. So Dana, again, excellent. We'll kind of jump into some other characters. I mean, we're an hour in and we've talked really pretty much about Dana Langdon, but and Emma, but Dr. Robbie in this episode, we get a lot of him checking in with different sorry, my throat. One sec. Had to pause it there for some water because my throat was dry. Robbie is again kind of going through and checking on everybody that's working. Just as he does in his attending, he's kind of checking with the residents and the med students. He does have some interesting conversations again. There's a so it's 4th of July weekend. There is a guy that comes in that was in like a stunt show with motorcycles, another motorcycle accident. We get allusion to it. And Dr. Robbie is clearly being set up for. I honestly think at this point, because a lot of people are like, oh, he's going to get in a motorcycle accident. That's how the season's going to end. I think it's more of this is going. They keep building all these things up to try to detour him from going on these or going on his sabbatical. This one I think is interesting because this guy's in a motorcycle accident, and of all the things that could have gone wrong, he's pretty much okay. He just has to get stitches. But other than that, I mean, the guy escaped pretty scot-free from a fall off of a motorcycle pyramid, he called it, where he's, like, standing on the shoulders, I think it is, of, like, a pul of the people on the motorcycles, like, very Evil Knievel, and he's even dressed as Evil Knievel, which is pretty cool. But, yeah, this guy comes out pretty unscathed. He's just gotta get stitches in his knee, but no damage to the ACL, no damage to the knee, just some real bad cuts. But other than that, the guy's gonna be okay. Checks out to be okay. And then by the end of the episode, he's just texting as he's getting stitched up, and he's like, "Can I get back to the parade?" And they're like, "No, dude." But yeah, Robbie's definitely getting and everybody has pretty much said it to him at this point, like, "Oh, you really think that that motorcycle thing's a good idea?" Um, but I'm trying to think. It was because it was nurse heavy, we don't get a whole lot of Robbie, in this episode, which, him directing it, I totally get. Obviously, he's gonna be behind the camera a lot, but it's mostly just his check-ins and stuff. The only thing we really get from Robbie in this one is that, Lena, who is our, at-home hospice care, we find out in this episode she was a charge nurse, and I think she worked at the Pitt, actually, or at the Pittsburgh Trauma Center. And so she's worked with Robbie. So Robbie is very familiar with Lena, which I don't think we had gotten that yet. And Lena's the death doula who's been taking care of Roxy, our patient that has uh, big time bruising, but she is dying and is very terminal and in hospice care. And they're trying to figure out what's going on with her, and her husband's there, and is very involved with her care. And the death doula is behind one of the nurses stations, so that's what gave me the idea that she's worked the Pit, is that they're just letting her in behind the nurses station. So obviously she was a charge nurse there at one point, and Robbie's talking to her and says, hey, you want to want to help us out? We are at capacity because of Westbridge, over capacity actually, because of Westbridge is down due to a code black. And she's like, no, I don't want to help you, but she's talking. And then I think it's Dr. McKay that comes over and says, "Hey, we're ready to discharge Roxy to go home, and is everything set?" And then that's when Lena, our death doula, says, "No, like pharmacy still has to get. I think it's like the drip that they have to get ready for her to take home, like the painkiller to take home. That's basically going to be like an IV for her that she can hit the button and put in as much painkiller as she needs to feel comfortable." So they're getting that system thing or whatever it is, that product ready for her. I don't know what to call it, but they're getting that ready for her. And Robbie is talking, and then all of a sudden we get another doctor, and I don't remember what this doctor's name is. I'm trying to find it on the screen here. But they're at a nurse's station. This doctor comes over, and she says something along the lines of like, Dr. Santos has ordered consultation from her and her team, and uh, the notes are wrong in the chart. So this doctor that's come down from obviously one of the floors upstairs says that how am I supposed to basically how am I supposed to treat this patient if all the notes are wrong? Like the doctor is Michelle Campbell, internal medicine. So she's a doctor from upstairs. She's talking to Robbie, and Robbie's like, "What do you mean?" And she goes, "I don't know. Like a doctor, Issa Santos, um, is or sorry, Trinity Issa's the actress. Trinity Santos has been giving false info, not false information, wrong information on the charts." And Robbie's like, "You neglected to mention a history of appendectomy for the patient." And Dr. Santos is like, "No, like that patient didn't have an appendectomy." And she goes, the other doctor's like, Dr. Campbell's like, "Wait, what?" Like it says in her notes that this patient had an appendectomy. And Santos is like, "Oh no, sorry, that probably was a mistake because of the AI tool I've been using to do my notes that I'm behind on that Dr. Al-Hashimi has given us." And then Al-Hashimi comes out of the back room, and that's when Robbie's like, "Okay, you want to talk about this stupid AI thing? Let's talk about it." He says, "So Dr. Santos was using your AI tool on her charting, and it's been giving," he goes, "it had hallucinated a history of appendicitis for a patient, and Dr. Campbell can't operate or do things that she needs to do." And Al Hashimi goes, "Well, I mentioned before to Dr. Santos that AI is 2%, or does have a margin of error of about 2%. So 98% of the time it is correct, but you do need to go through and make sure that you've proofread it to make sure the information is correct." And then the patient, then Dr. Campbell's like, "The patient also supposedly has a history of headaches, and there's a consult on there from Dr. Santos that says that it needs to be followed up with Dr. Park in urology." And she goes, "I don't remember urology being that involved with headaches because it should have been neurology." And Dr. Robbie's kind of like, they're kind of laughing about it, but also, uh, Robbie's like, "This is a problem. This is the problem with your AI that you're trying to introduce. This is why I told you not to do this." But he's not that direct. Like it's a very much a moment of proving that maybe Robbie's right that the AI is wrong. But then Al Hashimi kind of pushes back on the fact that like it's not often wrong, and if you're proofreading it and using it as a tool, not just as the end all, that it does in fact cut down on the time that you have to sit as you try to dictate or write out your notes, which is 100% correct. So again, still that battle of AI and using it in the medical profession. But I mean, just imagine how dangerous that can be, right? You give the wrong orders, you have the wrong consult, you give a wrong drug, you give the wrong dose amount. I mean, there are so many things that could go wrong if you're not proofreading what's going on when you're trying to use AI as a tool to write out certain things. But obviously Dr. Santos continues to have issues writing down her notes and in her, getting into her charts. So she is just swamped. Like she's pretty much been taken out and sidelined because Al Hashimi has threatened her job, which is weird because I've heard a lot of people say this and read a lot of things about this and watching the doctors interact on TikTok with this show. They were like, they would never fire a year two resident because she can't get her charts done, because there's a lot of physicians that don't get their charts done and nothing ever really happens to them. But it's a constant struggle. And there's actually even a point in this episode uh where Robbie's like, "Where is Santos?" And Dana makes the suggestion that she can't help Robbie because she's so behind in her charts. And Robbie's basically like, "Well, who isn't?" Basically, he's stating that he also is behind, but he's not getting a wrist slap. And I think it's because Santos kind of has like an abrasive uh, counter to Al Hashimi when Al Hashimi's like, "Have you completed your?" And she's kind of uh, combative towards Al Hashimi, saying like, "I'll get him done when I want to get him done," kind of thing. And I think that's why Al Hashimi kind of has the problem with it. And there are obviously other residents and stuff that have not been completing their charts. So I don't know why it just seems to be the heat on Santos and not others. But Al Hashimi, again, talking to Robby about like, hey, as long as proofreading is happening, the AI has actually proven to increase the productivity of our physicians. Al-Hashimi, talking about her, we don't really have much from her either, which is great because I mean, again, this was a nurse focused episode. Uh, trying to think of Mel and Garcia really aren't involved. The only time we really get Garcia and Santos are clearly either in a relationship or sleeping together because Santos is like, "Are you coming over to my place later?" Whitaker will be busy, so you don't have to worry about him. So obviously, Santos and Whitaker are still annoyed with each other because they're roomies. But Santos is seeing Dr. Garcia. And Dr. Garcia, she's like, "Well, I don't know. We got to see what happens. Like it's busy, that's chaotic. I'll let you know." But so Garcia, we don't get a whole ton from. Santos is still struggling with her charts. Whitaker really has that moment with Louie. We'll kind of wrap up this episode because there's a moment where they all kind of come together, where they all have really big moments. But Dr. Kwan and Ogilvy are helping our patient get stitched up. Donnie, our nurse, he is showing Ogilvy and Kwan how to correctly stitch somebody up. There's a certain knot that if you put underneath the skin, it can cause bumping in the scar tissue. And honestly, it's a nice thing to do. Like, does this guy care about a little bit of a bump or two in his scar lining? Probably not, especially for what he does as a profession. He's a basically evil Knievel. He's a daredevil. Does that guy probably care about the bumps in his skin? No, but Donnie takes the time to be like, no, like I do this not here in the like internal side of things where it's kind of the opposite of what you're taught, but like we do it this way so that way there's not bumping in the scar tissue. And he goes, it's just a nice thing to do for the patient. And I was like, that's pretty cool that you're able to hide that knot so it doesn't cause bumping in the scar tissue, which is just a looks thing, a way it'll look. It doesn't infect or it doesn't hurt the patient anything. It just is the way that it's going to look after it heals. So I thought that was nice. He's teaching Ogilvy and Kwan how to do those knots so that they don't show on the scar tissue. And Ogilvy, I don't know if he's being a smartass, but he's basically like, "Damn, Donnie, like I want to see your expertise. Man, you're really good at this. Man." Like he's very overly complimentive of the work that Donnie's doing. So I don't know if he's being an asshole or not. Like I couldn't quite tell. I don't know what because he was before in the episode. So I'm thinking he's just kind of a dick, but I don't know. But Kwan, we finally get a admittance of Kwan. They're like Kwan or the Daredevil guy, the patient. He basically goes, "Looks like you guys have fun in here because Donnie's really good at what he does, and he's very lively and he's very friendly." And they're having a good time as they're stitching this guy up because it's pretty calm now. And the guy makes a comment of like, "You guys look like you have fun here," and Donnie's like, "No, yeah, I think we do have a pretty good time." And Ogilvy, "Yeah, I'm born to do this." And Kwan looks at him. Kwan's that humbling voice. She goes, "Okay, that's weird," because he's over the top all the time. And he goes, "I was born to do this." Kwan's like, "Okay, dude, bring it down a couple notches." She goes, "This isn't really my thing. People really aren't my thing," which we clearly can tell. But Kwan goes, "I want to go into pathology," which is more study of like tissue and cells and different things like so very much behind the scenes kind of stuff. A lot more lab diagnosing than actually going to see patients and stuff, which would be perfect in the line for her, like disease and studying that kind of stuff for her, where she is sitting somewhere in a lab or an office, just dissecting and trying to get into what the root causes are and not really have any patient interactions. She's just aiding other physicians and stuff to try to figure out what's going on with the blood and everything else. So pathology makes a whole lot of sense for Kwan, but also I kind of feel like it's she's not long for this show. I think maybe we get a season of her and then she moves on, but because she is a lot more behind the scenes. But we'll see. I don't want to write characters off that are going to be around for a while, but it does seem like that was mentioned on purpose, and it makes a lot of sense. And there are people that are pathologists, so we will kind of follow that as we go along. But I love Kwan and Ogilvy's like dynamic with all the other physicians because I think it just shows that there are all sorts of different type of people in this. Perla again is struggling quite a bit with Louie because that was who she often took care of when he came in. Perla was always around and really helped Louis. And she does. She has moments where she snaps a little bit in this episode. She has moments where she has some issues where she wants to kind of just decompress from the situation, and they let her. I don't think we get too much more from Perla in that sense, but just the fact that she is really struggling with this death. Princess is a lot, or shows up a lot in this episode. She manages some of the patient show or flow, so she kind of steps in right under Dana, because Perla is usually the one I think that Dana looks to, but now Princess has kind of stepped in and taken charge, and she's been really good in this episode. I mean, she does a lot with our patients. I know she does one with Roxy where she's been taking care of Roxy, the patient that comes in that's on hospice care. Um, Princess also has the moment where she is talking with Roxy, and she's basically like, because Roxy's like using a bedpan and she's struggling and then in pain because she's trying to move from the bedpan from out underneath her. And that's when Princess walks in and goes, "What are you doing?" And she goes, "I'm trying to get the bedpan out from underneath me. It's not comfortable and it's causing me some pain." And Princess goes, "Well, that's what we're here for." And such a great moment. I mean, such a great nurse. Really cares for her patients. It shows she's so kind and thoughtful and willing to help. And she wants to make her patients feel as comfortable as possible. And she knows how stressful these situations can be. And she is such an important part of this episode as well. Like, I would say besides she and Donnie have some really good moments in this one where, I mean, Princess taking care of her, and then Princess is also uh, talking to Donnie when Donnie is talking about like donuts and what's going on in the hospital. And um she Princess is also around talking to Dana and Emma when um they're starting to, what was it? Princess is around when they're talking about the blood donuts, and Princess is basically like, "I just want my damn donuts." But there's a moment too where they're all talking about the fact that, like, instead of donuts, you could have gotten better security to protect us, and you could have gotten more workers to help us with our workloads, but instead you send down these blood donuts. And Princess is just like, "I'm just gonna get my donuts," like, whatever. And she's kinda looking at Dana like, "Oh," but, uh I don't feel like Princess would say that stuff, but definitely feels that stuff, and they definitely have conversations about this. But again, uh, she has a lot of great moments, and I think we got more of Princess than we've gotten in most of the other episodes where Javadi and McKay and Princess are trying to figure out again what is going on with this patient that's complaining about pain, and like she doesn't want to go home. The death doula is like, "No, like we'll make you as comfortable as possible. We'll get you home." And she's a nurse, so she knows what she's doing. The husband seems to be very caring. Princess is like, "I'll go call you an ambulance so we can transport you to get you home." And the husband's like, "I'll wait for you and I'll ride with you." And the patient Roxy goes, "No, go ahead. I'll catch up with you later." And the death doula is like, Lena is like, "I'll ride with her and then we'll catch up with you at home." It's still not clear as to why. There's multiple conversations that Princess and McKay have with our patient Roxy in this episode where they're talking about like their kids, like they have kids, and they're kind of comparing like, notes on that. And then uh the I'm getting the sense that Roxy, the patient, feels like she's a burden to her husband. I know a lot of people are like, is she getting abused? Is he too involved with her care? Is he just like stressing her out? Like, I think it's more of our patient Roxy feels bad for what she's doing to Lena and her husband because they care a lot about her. And Lena's like to a point where she's pretty much accepted the fact that death is imminent for her and she could go at any point, and she's just dragging it out, and it's now impacting her kids, it's impacting her husband, it's not allowing them to move on. They're just kind of stuck in this cycle of pain and grief, and they're all just watching their mother slash wife slowly fade, and she feels bad for that. That's where I feel like this is heading it, because he's very loving and he's like very caring, and when they do have moments of like physical touch, it's not like she's scared of him. So I feel like there could be that where they want you to kind of think maybe there is some kind of abuse going on, but I think it's more she feels like the burden and she just wants to stay at the hospital because she doesn't want to go home because she doesn't want her kids and her husband to keep having to deal with her. And she feels like she's already been awful enough. But I mean, that's what the husband has said multiple times. Like, this is what I've signed up for. This is what, what I thought being your husband would be. And your kids know that too. But I don't think she accepts that. And I think she wants Lena and them to move on. I think she wants her husband to move on. And, they can't really do that if she's still around. So what a horrible situation, but I think a very realistic one. So what else? We got some other stuff with a few of our other patients. We got Jackson's condition, who is the patient, the young man that comes in from the campus, college campus. He's a law student. His sister Jada is now there, and they're trying to figure out what's going on with him. There was obviously the security guard that got hit with the chair that Jackson Davis had thrown. So we did, and I mentioned this. I do think that the security guard still is does discriminate or is racist. I think that's part of it, but it took a different turn. He does and is struggling with something mentally. Jackson says that and when he's talking to the psychiatrist, he says that he does hear voices and he does have hallucinations. And the voices and the hallucinations are telling him not to finish law school. And so there is definitely something going on mentally there. Jada at one point has then told, I think it's Princess that's talking to her. It's one of the nurses, but the nurses say that Jada finally did admit to the fact that like she hasn't really seen him a whole lot recently because of some of the stuff that he's been doing. And but it's mostly just been in line with what he's been struggling with mentally. So we don't know what's going on there. I don't know if it's schizophrenia or if it's bipolarness or if it's some kind of drug. Like we don't know what it's really related to. I know sometimes a lot of students will use Adderall. I don't know if that's what's going on, but there is definitely a mental alteration that's been happening, and we're now getting more and more. But that's where we kind of leave Jackson. We don't really know too much more, so we're going to get more of him in the episodes to come. Our deaf patient is finally getting some treatment, and we have Princess who can speak some sign language. She starts to talk to her, and this is really the only one I think Santos sees throughout the episode. But basically, the interpreter has to go because there's another patient that needs her assistance. So she goes back upstairs and she says, "I'll be back," or IT will send down an interpreter or like one of the screens that somebody can speak sign language with her. And Princess goes, "I know some sign language." After she had made the joke, her and Perla know like 15 combined, which is really funny moment. But Princess says that I can speak some sign language. So she starts to speak to her, and the first part of the conversation, she knows what's going on. But then as Santos starts to ask more and more questions about how she's feeling, we come to realize that Princess is again very limited in what she can say. And she goes, "I don't know. It sounds like she fainted, but I'm not sure. I'm not 100%." And you always want to be pretty sure in these situations when you're dealing with people's health. And she's just like, I don't really know what she's saying now. Like I kind of do, but I don't want to guess because there could be something wrong that we miss. And then Santos goes, "Well, tell me when you've got somebody in here that can actually give me answers because I've got a lot of questions for her." Very cranky. And then it's funny because Princess like does the sign for cranky, like this girl is very cranky right now, and the patient's like, "It's fine, I get it." But so sad. Like I'm assuming this happens quite a bit where you just want to try to get answers and try to help them. I don't know why, and maybe like she doesn't write, but I was like, why didn't they just like give her a pen and paper? Like maybe she's in too much pain to do that, and they don't want to ask her. But like, I would have thought next step would have been like before waiting on the interpreter. I'd be like, can you write? Can you like write down like what's going on? So I don't know. It felt very interesting, but I know what they're trying to set up. They're trying to show that communication barriers do happen, and there's not somebody around to get answers. This can be a very scary situation for somebody that's hard of hearing or can't hear. What else? Trying to think of anybody else that we haven't really touched. Donnie, our nurse, really great moment when he is teaching the med students and like the first years how to stitch up, because a lot of times physicians haven't really taken the time to learn a lot of the basics that nurses. And that's something I think that is shown throughout this episode and why it's said so much. In fact, there's actually a nurse, I forget what her name is in the show. Let me try to find it. But there is a moment when they're taking care of the patient that has gone evil Knievel style and has scraped up his knee. Nurse Kim Tate, who was a real nurse. Amber Martinez is a real nurse or had been a real nurse, and she's gotten into acting, and they've used her for the show. She actually, Amber Martinez is, they said she is one of the nurses that when they brought all the characters in to do like a boot camp on how like the ER actually runs, she is one of the instructors. So she actually works in the healthcare system, and she teaches them how a nurse would actually interact and how some of these things would actually go with patients. So she is key to the show, much more behind the scenes, but she jumps in as an actress in this one. And Nurse Kim Tate, who she plays, there's a part where Robby or Al-Hashimi pitch like a question of like, what does this patient need? And it's something that really the physicians would only know, but she's obviously been around physicians and this kind of stuff so much that she is the one that tells the physicians what they need. And they're like, how the hell did she know that? And Robbie, or sorry, then Whitaker makes the point of like, that's when he was like, the nurses run the ER, they know their shit. Like, you listen to them, like they are the ones that know this stuff. And it is so true. Like, physicians know broad picture stuff. The nurses are so smart that like they catch on to this stuff, and like the stuff they know, honestly, they go into depth way more than some of the physicians do. Like, the physicians a lot of time in internal medicine, they're just diagnosing and then moving on and then prescribing, whereas the nurses are the ones that are doing the work. It's quite incredible the stuff that they pick up on and they learn from their counterparts. And so it's a very interesting dynamic, and it's part of the problem of like when there is a cultural problem between physician and nursing, it's because oftentimes the nurses feel like they do all the work, and then the physicians are just there to take the credit. So I know that that's a big driving force in some of this stuff where you get bad culture, but it's not like that in this ER. I mean, somewhat, I think there are some doctors that they don't like, but for the most part, it does seem like the physicians and the nurses do get along. But the nurses are, again, like I said, the nurses run the show. The physicians are just kind of there to diagnose and prescribe. But where was I? Oh, yes. So Princess is just trying to figure all that out. Or not Princess. Kim Tate says all those things, and Whitaker's like, "Yeah, you listen to the nurses. The nurses are in charge here. We just go with it." So I thought that was a brilliant moment, and I love that they brought in an actual real nurse that's practicing to really drive home that point. And it's cool because then there's this moment where the doctors kind of look to Robbie to react to the fact that this nurse had just basically done their job, and he goes, "They're not wrong. Like, she wasn't wrong." So I do love that. I thought that was a real good moment in the episode. But then we get Donnie, who's stitching up this person after they've kind of figured all this out. Donnie's stitching him up, and he has this moment where he's got like DC and then MB inked on his wrist. And Joy goes, "What's the tattoos?" And Donnie goes, "Well, DC stands for death and chaos because of the Pitt shooting, and then MB, many blessings." And she goes, "Oh, cool. What does that mean?" And he goes, "Well, MB means many blessings because I got that when my daughter was born." So it's very like, I mean, yin yang, very different, right? The death and chaos is that hurt and trauma and all the past that he dealt with during the shooting, and then the happiest day of his life. So worst day of his life, probably best day of his life on both wrists. And I thought that was a great touch to really show just how these people are feeling and how they're trying to cope, because everybody's trying to cope with this trauma. We just haven't gotten into how they're all dealing with this trauma. Okay, so just kind of looking through my notes, I think we're ready to get to that final scene. And this scene was uh very intense, and in the sense of like emotional. So they have what they call debriefs, and usually it's not to this grand a scale, because your debriefs are oftentimes with your physician and then the nursing team that was in on the case. And sometimes you'll see, depending on the severity of the cases or the importance of it, you'll see C-suite members or directors come down from like cardio or whatever. But basically, the debriefs are oftentimes, from what I've gathered, used to not only discuss like the care and like what went wrong, but for the most part, it's also an emotional gathering of sorts because you're trying to move past and maybe you're trying to reflect, and sometimes the debriefs are used as kind of just to say your last piece for that patient. But for the most part, I think it's mostly professional where you're talking about uh, what went wrong, what went right, what can you learn from that moment. And debriefs aren't typically like too emotionally driven as far as reflecting on the patient's life, because a lot of times you don't really know the patient. But in this case, the debrief, which I found that they did a really nice job with this, because Louie was a frequent flyer, the debrief, they move in, and I think they do this a lot. They move him obviously out of the trauma area, and they to try to free up room in the hospital. They'll move him into like a room where it's not really a treatment room. It's more of where a family member can come in and say their goodbyes, and it's usually decorated different, but it doesn't look very hospitally. It's much more of just like a place of reflection. So they moved Louis into this room, and they had already moved him in there. This is the room where Dana and Emma were cleaning the dead body, and Robbie's like, "All right," and they all kind of gather in this debrief. And the really interesting part of this is because of how many people have interacted with Louis, because he's been in there so much. Like the room is full. I think there's like 20, probably 20 people in there around or around Louis's bed, and um, they all come in and they're all chatting, and they all have their moments where they're reflecting on the care that they've provided Louis. And that's when you get um, our nurses talking, and Nurse Tate is in there, and she's talking about the fact that, like, how about last summer when we didn't see him for months? That was sad, but also good. He'd finally quit drinking, and then they didn't need him as much. And then Langdon saying, "How many times are we going to ask him to stop drinking and smoking?" And he kind of looks to Robbie, and Robbie, because Langdon is very reflective, Robbie kind of looks at him. It's kind of like that. You're the one to talk. It almost look to it like it's kind of like, I feel bad for you, but you're one to talk. It's very interesting. Like it's an very interesting look. And then McKay says he always talked about Harrison, or asked about Harrison. That was her kid. And then Whitaker says always said thank you, and really appreciated the way that they care for him. And then that's when Langdon brings up the photo that he has, and he goes, I found this photo of him with this woman, and he goes, I didn't know he was married. And then finally we get Robbie, who seems to have been very distant so far in this season, where he's not really talked a lot about his patients or not really gotten into a lot of personal feelings and stuff like that. He is the one that has gotten close enough where it's kind of like there have been moments where I've kind of questioned, like, has Robbie been does he really get involved with patients? And for the most part, he's very arm's length kind of person. So he doesn't really have a lot of stories about his patients, even though he seems like somebody that would. I do think he's a great physician. I do think that he does care genuinely about his patients, but I do think he puts up his guard because of the things he's been through. I think he does put up a guard or a wall of like, I don't want to get too close to them, because like when things like this happen, then I'm really distraught. And he starts to say that I started caring. It was one night 5 years ago. I started to care for Louie, and Louie had had a lot to drink, and he was very very open that night, and he said a lot more things than I thought he would. But he said, "That's Rhonda in that picture. That's his wife." And then he said, she was his high school sweetheart. About 5 years ago, he was covering that night shift, and he was very talkative. And he was talking about he was born and raised in Pittsburgh, lifelong Steelers fan. He was a groundskeeper at Three River Stadium until 1998 before they closed it. That was the Pittsburgh Steelers' old stadium. And if you think back, it's a callback to, he had a conversation. I think it was Langdon. It might have been Whitaker, but I think it was Langdon, where he says something. Yeah, it was Langdon. He says something about he loves grass and he loves taking care of grass. Langdon's like, "What the hell why do you like taking care of grass?" So Langdon hadn't even gotten that deep in with Louis, who Langdon was the closest to Louis. And so Louis felt very close, and Langdon didn't even know that he had a wife or any of this stuff about Louis. So I think there's a little bit of that. I think there's going to be that going forward of Langdon going, did I really know Louis like I thought I knew him, because I was the one that really cared for him? And then I think there's going to be Langdon feeling bad about the fact that he was the one stealing drugs from Louie when Louie was trying to get on the mends, and he never really like he got that acceptance of his apology when Louie accepted Langdon's apology. But I do think there's going to be some fallout of Langdon feeling bad still for like he almost is responsible for Louie's death. But Robby was talking again about, Louie never wanted kids and his wife did. Rhonda wanted kids. And she finally got pregnant. And that's when he changed his tune. He got excited. He was so excited to have a kid. She was about 8 months pregnant and she gets into a car accident. And both Rhonda and the baby were killed in the car accident. And then, bam, that is the glass shattering moment of like, damn, now we know why Louie was always drunk. Like, not always, like, that wasn't the only reason, but this is why it got to a point of now he's dead because of it. Because he definitely had trauma before because he'd come in to get care about 5 years ago and he was drinking then. But he really struggled with alcoholism and he's clearly isolated himself from anybody that cares for him, much like people would when they're going through this kind of grief. And because of the car accident, because he loses two loved ones that he didn't come back from that, and he said that he never really came back from that, and that's ultimately what causes his demise. And then you get a really great shot of that hand that was free because Dana had told Emma to kind of leave it out. Emma grabs his hand, and it is such a powerful moment because she's like, this is why we did that. This is why we did, nobody's here. A loved one's not here to say goodbye to him. And Robby says, may his memory be a blessing. And it is I'm getting chills thinking about this. This was the end of the episode. Like it goes to the end title or end credits. And it is such a powerful moment to end Louie's story, but also continue these other characters' story arcs on. And there's going to be so much fallout from this, I believe. Like I really do think that this is going to be a turning point for some of our characters and their relationships. I think that Langdon and Robby, because of this death, I think they're going to start to kind of come together and they're going to have their moments coming up here soon. Interested to see what happens with Perla. Perla is really struggling with this. Dana, again, running from all her problems, and now you topple this on. And the more trauma that keeps building and building it, the more I think that you're getting to certain breaking points with some of our characters. So very fascinated to see how this show progresses with our characters. But leaning into next episode, I mean, I think we're starting to finally figure out what's going on with Roxy and her hospice care. I think again, she just feels a burden. She's a burden to everybody else. So I think that's where that storyline's headed. I'm really interested to see what's going on with Jackson Davis. I mean, mentally, is it schizo? Is it, Adderall drug related? Is it, what's going on with Jackson? How's he hearing those voices and how is he seeing those things? Emma, the nurse, I feel like there's a lot of focus on her this episode. I feel like she's very in between of like, she loves what she's doing, but she's scared all at the same time. So do we get a point where her and Dana kind of break together, or does Dana break and Emma's there to catch? That seems to be a relationship that they're really starting to lean into. So I'm interested to see kind of how that progresses. Like I said, Langdon, Robby heading for a confrontation at some point. McKay, again, she is so intuitive with her patients. She seems to really understand what's going on inside their heads. So I'm thinking she's the one that's going to figure out why Roxy wants to stay at the hospital and not return home. Who else? Santos, man, it's tough because she's such a great character. Kind of her showing in this, it's just getting to her. So I do wonder, what is her tipping point? What's going to happen with her? Because I feel like this is not something that's going to go away quickly. Her not being able to get her work done on the notes. So I don't know. I don't know if she breaks with Al-Hashimi, if she gets into it with Al-Hashimi. It seems like Robbie's pretty pissed at her right now. So I don't know what'll happen there. Whitaker's going to take this really hard. Whitaker's going to feel like, the world's kind of crashing in on him, I believe, just because everything had been going right. And it's nothing he could have done. There's not, and Langdon explains it to him like, dude, there's nothing you could have done. Like this was going to happen eventually. It just happens now. What else? Princess, again, great episode for her. I hope they're able to kind of incorporate her a little bit more. Uh, Everybody else kind of took a back burner on this one, which was great because we got a bunch of the nurses, but we didn't get any kind of progression with Mel. We didn't get any kind of progression much with Garcia. Garcia is now seems to be in a relationship with Santos. Uh, who else? McKay, not too much on her. Whitaker, I'm trying to think of anybody else that we're missing. Moen and Javati. Like Moen, I still think Moen's gonna be either transferring to another hospital or I don't know. They just it seems like there's a lot of characters, a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and she's kind of taken the biggest back burner throughout the first 6 episodes. So I'm really fat, and her mom keeps calling, so I don't know what's going on there. We've not really ever got any kind of answer to why she keeps calling. And then Javati, it's her birthday, that's mentioned, but I we got maybe like 2 minutes of Javati, I think, and then I think it was with the patient that's in hospice care, but we didn't get really any of Javati, and I know we're gonna get a lot of her coming up, so, yeah, and, again, mentioning Mel, like, we don't get any of her, um, deposition stuff, so we're gonna catch back up with a lot of these physicians next week. And then I think Dr. Abbott's gonna come back, which it's getting closer and closer to when he would start to report in for the night shift stuff and the transition there. So I think in 3 or 4 episodes, we might get Abbott, and maybe they call him in early because of how crowded the ER is. It was funny. One last thing, Lena, who is the hospice, the death doula, she when Robbie was talking to her and he's like, "You can't stick around." She's like, "No, but I did put a bet down for $20." I think it was like fireworks or something. I don't remember what it was. Why she put for $20 on why Westbridge was closed. So she jumps into the security pool too. So that was pretty funny. But overall, I mean, again, this was the best show of the season so far. I can't wait to see where they progress some of these characters. And there's some big time moments coming up just based off of what they've built from this episode alone. But again, thank you for listening. Thanks for watching. I know this was a longer episode, but this was an exciting one to really cover and dive into. It was about an hour long, the episode itself, and we got so much wrapped up and tied up into this with the characters. So again, thank you if you've stuck around this long. We are at the Screen Society Podcast on all socials. You can search because we have all sorts of crazy usernames. I'm going to try to include those in the description below. So if you're looking for us over on X, Instagram, Facebook, and even TikTok, you can find us there. Haven't really posted much on TikTok yet, but we'll get around to it. And then we will be back next week to talk season 2, episode 7 of The Pit, which is titled 1 p.m. Again, looking forward to talking with you all again, getting back into The Pit because it is still my favorite show on TV, right up there with the new Game of Thrones series. So I would say they're pretty neck and neck, and they just keep outdoing each other. So phenomenal stuff. I can't wait to talk with you all next week. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next.